Well, I'd like to welcome everybody back. It is noon, so we're going to get started. My name is Billie Spevak. With Accelerant Research. I'm a senior strategist. For those of you who listen to Karen, welcome back. For those of you who are just joining us now, thank you so much. We appreciate your time. And you are in store for a wonderful afternoon of learning. Just a few things. So let's see, I'm going to turn this on, and then I'm going to talk about tech, which first, my first objective is actually to get this on. Okay, let's see. Okay, you should be able to see that now. So again, welcome to the 2020 Quarantine Virtual Insights Conference hosted by Accelerant Research. And again, my name is Billie Spevak. I'm a senior strategist at Accelerant. We appreciate your time. We're going to go ahead and jump right in because we have an hour's full of great content for you. So just a couple of things. I think most of us have been using some form of remote learning or remote working platforms for the last couple of weeks as we work from home. So we all know that we're at the mercy of tech. Some of you are joining us with Zoom today, others are live streaming. And as we know, this can be a somewhat unpredictable platform, especially as so many of us across the United States are trying to take advantage of it to keep connected and to keep learning. And so we'll do our best, but there might be glitches here and there. So thank you so very much for being patient with that. Just a few things to note is that we will be taping. We'll be recording all of the presentations and we will be posting those up later for you. So if you're not able to attend some of them throughout the day, just go ahead and check in with us and we will have those up for you. As well, just obviously we're all professionals, so be respectful of everyone is giving of their time, both as attendees such as yourself, as well as our presenters like Nadja today. So just be constructive with your input and your feedback. We will be doing Q&A. For those of you who are on Zoom, you have the ability to ask questions in the chat feature, and we really encourage you to do so. At the end of her talk, Nadja will be addressing your questions. So thank you so much for that. And then also, in addition to learning, this is a great opportunity for us to forge relationships as marketers and researchers. And so in addition to doing the Q&A section, you can also use the hashtag QVIC2020 on Twitter and go ahead and we encourage you to post your thoughts. And at the end of this, we're also, speaker, we're also encouraging you to go on and talk to us about how your company sells insights internally and to give us some of your thoughts and ideas as well. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and jump in. It's my honor to present Nadja Hendrix, who is Analytics and Insights for Procter Gamble. She's going to be talking to us today about influencing with insights, getting people to act. Nadja, welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Great. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and allow you to go ahead and put your presentation up.
All right. All right, can everybody see that?
Excellent, we can see it.
Fantastic. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So thank you for the great introduction. Again, I'm Nadja Hendrix. My day job is that I work in Analytics and Insights at Procter Gamble. My day, night, and everything in between job is that I am a wife, mom of 4, and so that is the 24-hour job that happens at the same time. I am going to be talking about influencing with insights and getting people to act, but I love to always start with just a little bit about me. Whenever I hear other folks talk, I want to learn a little bit more about who they are and how they approach life and how they think about things, and it really helps me to then take in what they share moving forward with the presentation. So I thought I would do the same thing with you guys today. So you see a couple of these pictures up here of my family, my husband, my 4 kids. They're 16, 9, 5, 5, and we have one about to turn 3 in just a few weeks. So our house is full, and especially as most of you are kind of learning how to do the work from home, teach from home, and all of that as well, we are doing the same. So that's a little bit about my family. I am originally from Charlotte, North Carolina. It's also where I live now, beautiful Queen City. I am an alum of Hampton University, which is a private HBCU in Hampton, Virginia. I have an undergraduate degree in business administration and marketing, and my MBA also from there. In the bottom left, you see that little gift box. That is an image of a sampler from a company that I have with my mom and my sister. We own a gourmet candy company called Southern Sweets Kitchen. So we do brittles and chocolates and all that kind of stuff. And so that's a little side thing that we love, using my mom's recipes that are about 40 years old. And so now we've started to sell those, been in business for about 5 years now. If you're into Myers-Briggs, you can see my Myers-Briggs down there. I am an ESTJ to the core. Everything in that, the words in that head all describe me pretty much perfectly. And then finally, my kind of approach to life, and actually one of the reasons why I wanted to do the talk today is this quote from Maya Angelou, which is, you know, when you get, give, when you learn, teach. And so it's all about kind of giving back, paying it forward for all the folks that have invested in me and being able to do the same. So I just thought it would be helpful to give you a little bit about kind of who I am as we move into the rest of the talk about how do you take what you learn about people, consumers, the marketplace, and turn those insights into action. So when we talk to folks that work in the insights industry, you know, there's lots of different ways to describe what it is that we do. So some folks call it market research, it's consumer insights or consumer understanding, it's data and analytics. There's lots of different ways to describe what it is that I do, what it is that many of us do. But when people ask me, Nadja, what do you do? Or what do you get paid to do? And I tell them, I tell stories that get people to act. Right? I tell stories that get people to act. And that's really important for me. Number one is because in order to get people to act, you have to compel them to do something. That's the stories piece of it. And then really, I'm compensated for my ability to get people to do something with what it is that I've shared. And that's the act part of it. So that's kind of the premise of this, is I tell stories that get people to act. And the way that I'd like to spend our time today is giving you a little bit of insight into, number one, what does it require to get people to act on the insight or the recommendation that you're bringing? And then what's the best way to craft your story in order to deliver on that, okay? Here's the thing about this though, this act thing. How many of you have been in a situation, and I'll just say it for me because I've done it, where you have given an amazing presentation, you had all the right data, you had all the right consumer or marketplace insights that you shared, and then nothing happens after you've shared all of that. I mean, I can think back to a time that I gave a presentation. I had spent weeks working on this presentation. We had done a ton of research, and I was ready to go share all of my findings with the lead team, and I had a big recommendation that was going to ask them to spend some money in order to go after this big idea that I knew would benefit the company. And so I gave the presentation. I felt like it went well. People were engaged. At the end of it, the leader, the general manager at the time, gave kudos about how great the presentation was. And I walked out of the room with a big smile on my face, like, yep, I did it. I probably did a little dance on the way back to my desk as well. And then that afternoon, had a meeting with my boss. My manager was like, hey, how'd it go? I'm like, oh, it was great. I killed it. And then he said, great, so what did they agree to do? And I was like, and there were crickets, and I couldn't think of anything that they agreed to do in the meeting. And I thought, well, I gave them all the things to think about. They probably need to go back and talk about what's feasible or what they can do. And so I expect that they will make a decision, you know, by the end of the week. The next day, asked me again. The next week, asked me again, and there still wasn't anything that happened after I had given what I felt like was an amazing presentation. And so there was a big learning for me in that moment, a teachable moment that said, hey, you can share as many things as you want and feel like that you've given the right story, but ultimately we've failed if we haven't gotten people to act or go do anything after we've given them all the information. So if we don't do anything, we failed. We really want to act. So then how do you actually get people to act? You know, how do you get them to take what you've shared, really understand it, internalize it, feel compelled to go do something about it? That's really what we're going to talk about today. When I think about that, it really comes down to this whole idea of influence, right? And the art of influence. This is Merriam-Webster's dictionary's definition of the word influence, which says then to affect or alter by indirect or by intangible means. And I love this indirect or intangible means thing because it says it's not just about demanding that someone go do something because of what you shared, or even hoping that they might go do it, which is what I did in the example that I gave a little earlier. It really is about how do you craft it and are strategic in a way that your indirect or intangible ways that you bring the story to life really allow them to want to go do it on their own. There are two things that I want to make sure that you take away throughout this talk today. And I'm going to give you the first one now. So write it down or imprint it in your mind. Here's the first one. The top secret idea is all about making it their idea, right? That is really one of the key ways to really showcase true influence, is making it their idea, where the person who's making that decision feels like whether they came up with it on their own or they came up with it with you, that you've given them the amount of information and led them down the path, but that they can have some space to be able to feel like it's their idea. That's one of the first things I want to make sure that you take away. That's critical, actually, okay? But in order for you to do that, you've got to really understand who the decision maker is, how they think about things, know your audience, okay? You've probably seen this cartoonist or marketunist here of like all the different types of leaders and how they think about things, how they make decisions. And so regardless of, you know, what your leader, which one they are, and I've probably presented to, engaged with, or tried to influence someone in each of these 8 different buckets. But regardless of where they fall, understanding who they are as a leader, how they think about things, what typically compels them to act, what are their pet peeves or the things that cause them to shut down, knowing all of those things are really important for you to then think about how you might bring the right tone, the right level of detail, the timing of when you bring those things. All of those are really important in order to be able to influence that person. So before you can even think about the content of what you would bring, it's really, really important to know who it is that you're actually trying to influence, and what's the best way to approach them to ultimately get the yes that you're trying to get. This is the blueprint. And so when I think about what's required to do those two things, to tell, you know, the right information that gets people to do something and to get the yes, there's 3 things that are involved here. And I'm going to go through each of those in more detail. The first one is all about aligning with the business goal. The middle part is about telling the story. And then the end is, what do you need to do to make it easy for that decision maker to say yes? The first piece, align with the business goal. This is all about preparation. So in order to align your recommendation with the goal, that's number one, an important thing, because you want what you bring to feel like it has a place within what that decision maker is trying to achieve, right? Does it help to either advance, you know, what they're trying to do? Does it help to go along with both the short and the long-term goals that they are accountable for? Know what their metrics are that are on their scorecard. What are they evaluated for? And how can you then align with that? Understand if there are some personal goals that that decision maker has. If that decision maker really has stated that they want to be in touch with the consumer or really understand the broader marketplace, make sure that what you're doing and creating for that presentation sets them up well to be able to do that. And then research what's worked and what hasn't. So if you've never presented to that person before, you may say, well, I have no idea how they react when people present in this or when they bring certain ideas to them. So talk to people who have. Other folks, use your network to be able to understand kind of, hey, what are some tips and tricks about really getting this person to engage or getting them to be open, understand things that they've already potentially said no to in the past, so that you can think about how you might need to address some of those barriers as you move throughout the presentation. Again, this is all back to the preparation, and it's the preparation for the presentation, not necessarily the preparation for the content just yet. We're going to get there. The second piece of this whole aligning with the business goal is all about strategically positioning your reco. So this is like, what is the role that your recommendation is going to play within the broader set of objectives or goals that that business leader or that decision maker has, and clarifying your role within that. You may not be saying, I'm going to solve world peace. You may not be saying, I'm going to go solve everything that that this person wants to achieve, but understand the particular role of what you are going to bring and the role that it plays within that. I think about this as thought leadership. And so when you know where things are going to go or where you expect them to go, you can then strategically position your idea to help along that path and to move the business, move the team, move that leader even forward beyond where they may be today. Along with kind of aligning with the business goals is this idea of creating a sense of urgency. And so this is one of the things I think is important, because oftentimes when we let things fester or when things lie in wait, they are less likely to actually be acted on. The more we think about things and sometimes overanalyze, or things just sit on the desk, other things that seem more urgent or that have a higher priority or appear to have a higher priority can come in and overshadow what we have then shared. And so creating a sense of urgency really allows us then to bring up the importance of what we want to go do, but get people to do something about it now versus later. So a couple of ways to do that. The first one is to get their attention. So this is about thinking of, getting their engagement early on. This is interactivity of the presentation or of the content that you're going to share. The second piece is showcasing the opportunity cost. So what happens if they don't take your reco? What are the risks if they don't move forward with what you're proposing? That's another way that then begins to create a sense of urgency that would compel folks to want to go do something. And then don't be afraid to be provocative. If you come in with the status quo, that's kind of oftentimes expected. It also may not get people to engage. They may tune out because they may have heard it over and over again. So don't be afraid to bring in something that may feel like it is outside of the circle for where things typically fall. But sometimes our role in insights and being objective people is to come in and stretch people's expectation, and also stretch the realm of what they think might be feasible, or that they may even have the capabilities to go do. Create a sense of urgency, get them to act now versus letting them wait until later. I told you there were two big things that I wanted you to remember as we went through this. The first one was around that importance of influence, right? And getting people to act. And it was all about making it their idea. The second one is in the stories piece. So I go back to what I say, this is what I do. I tell stories that get people to act. This also goes back to why I shared more about me at the beginning, that ultimately I kind of told you the story of who I am, so that you could then empathize, connect with me, see me as a human and not just as a presenter. So I'm coming back to this as kind of the crux of the content for what you might share, because it's really, really important. The art of storytelling is something that allows you to set up and really drive this presentation to a way that gets the response that you want to be able to get from that decision maker or from that leader, okay? telling stories. In order to tell the story, you really have got to be the voice of who you want to bring to the forefront. So for me, it's all about being the voice of the consumer. And sometimes that even means that I can position myself or show up as the consumer. It might be an N of one, right? But it still is a real experience that I may have that I can bring. There's a few different ways to do this, and I want to tell you a couple of examples that I've used just to give you a little bit of inspiration here in this space. The images that you see here are a story that I told about a professional contractor named Steve. We had done a ton of research in context and some ethnographic research to really understand contractors in the home improvement space. And Steve was one of the contractors that we spent some time with, and his story really allowed us to bring to life the big recommendation that we had and the big ask that we had for the general manager. And so after we spent time with Steve, we crafted the key points of his story, his challenges that he was facing, how he went about his day, how he went about coming off the job and then coming back home. And again, this was all about bringing to life what his key needs were, so that I could then set up, here's how we as an organization, as a category, as a company, can solve for the needs of folks like Steve. And so we brought this story in and kind of walked the whole leadership team through kind of a day in the life of Steve that really allowed them to feel like they were on the job site with us when we were doing this in-context research, to make them feel like they knew Steve, or even that they knew someone like Steve that they could connect with, able to empathize with really the things that Steve was going through as he was running his small business. Another way that we've done this, we had done some work to really understand low-income consumers. And when presenting to a group of, corporate professional leadership team, they are not always as in tune with folks that may be living in a low-income environment or have that as their reality. And so bringing some engagement into the story and even some pre-work for them to go do around what it's like to have to make different decisions or choices based off of your limited income was one thing that really helps them to, again, empathize, connect with, and feel like they knew those consumers. We did a couple of things. One is we brought in a simulation for low income that Harvard Business had done, and had them go through the online simulation of how to get through 30 days on that limited income. Choices that were made, curveballs that were thrown, on day 15 of that 30 days with an unexpected bill that they had to figure out how to pay. What happens when the car breaks down? How do you make choices between whether this is something that I need to pay for now or whether it can wait until later? And how do you get to the end of the simulation and not be in the red? And that was really a great way to kind of bring some engagement and still tell the story of what these consumers were going through and the choices that they needed to make, and therefore the role that our business or our products or our categories could play was one way to do that. We also had those leaders to spend 14 days living on that income. You can imagine how interesting that was, and the initial response that we got when we asked them to do it, but they all kind of joined in and said, yep, we're going to participate and do it for 14 days. And that also was a way to kind of tell the story of what we wanted to get across and have them to feel like they really understood who it was that we were speaking about, who it was that we were trying to serve, and therefore why we were making the recommendation that we were making for our portfolio, for our future innovation plans, and for how we might message or communicate with the key consumers that we wanted to win with. So those are two ways to talk about other consumers. Again, I also mentioned that you can even show up as the one consumer. So give examples of your own experience of things that you've been through or things that you experienced, particularly as it relates to the recommendation that you're wanting to bring. That's just another way for people to connect with the message and to understand where it is that you're coming from. So be the voice of the consumer, bring that consumer to life in whatever engaging or fun or really compelling way to make sure that people really feel what it is that you're communicating. The second piece around telling the story is all about knowing your stuff. So I love this, this image here, this meme. It's easy to talk about something if you know what you're talking about. When you don't know what you're talking about, it can often be really challenging, and sometimes it comes across as not being authentic or not being confident in what it is that you're communicating. So a few ways to show up as though you know yourself, know your stuff, excuse me. The first is credential yourself. So talk about kind of the work that has been done to this point, the in-depth amount of research or understanding, the sources that you use to gather that information, so that you then are proving from the beginning, before you even share your first point, hey, I know what I'm talking about. We've done the due diligence to understand, and therefore our recommendation is going to be sound. The second thing here is bring the appropriate data points. I think we're all learning and know now that, you know, data is available, more available than it has ever been in our history, but it's all about what we do with the data and how do you curate the set of data points that really are just enough to drive the message and the recommendation that you're bringing. So too much data can, you know, veer people off track or have them have too much information overload. But having the ability to craft and pull out the data points that are most important and most appropriate are what allow you to also show up as knowing your stuff. The third piece is then the delivery, right? How do you then present the information that you have, delivering that with confidence, delivering that in the appropriate flow that kind of brings the story and leads people down the story that you want to tell them so that they get to the end. That delivery also includes things like, you know, when you do tell a story, there is a beginning, a middle, and an end. So don't start in the middle, start at the beginning, so that you can, you know, make sure that people can follow the path that you're taking and that they don't get sideways or don't get off track and lose the path that you're taking them down. Bring in the appropriate visuals, you know, charts, graphs, whatever it is that you need to do to also supplement the fact that you're speaking. So your delivery, as well as from a speaking standpoint, as well as from a visual standpoint, will also kind of reinforce the key messages that you're bringing and just continue to let folks know that you do indeed know your stuff. The third piece of that blueprint is then the, you know, how do you get the yes? Just make it easy for people to say yes. Sometimes we bring the best of ideas. We bring great information. We bring great insights, but we make it so difficult and complicated that people want to say yes, but they're not really sure if they should. That it sometimes feels like a risk to move forward with what we're bringing in and what we've decided that we think is the right thing to do. So this third piece is about how do you get people to say yes already and make it really easy for them to do that. The first in this section is really think it through. So this actually goes back to the first section, which was all about preparation. Is another piece of that preparation that then allows for this section to be successful. That means thinking about within the recommendation, what are all the benefits and the pros of what you're bringing, but also what are the constraints that we're working in? What's the environment, and is it, how does that affect how your recommendation can come to life and whether it can be adopted? Think about the cons of things. Every idea has something that could be a potential limitation or could be, you know, a non-starter for some folks. Think about that and how you might address that where appropriate, whether that's within the presentation or being prepared for the discussion part of that, to then have some thoughts around how you might either address those constraints or bring those constraints and turn them into positives. Then think about the execution plan. Like, how is this going to work? Have a plan for how this could get executed, because this is oftentimes where the recommendation and folks are ready to say yes, but the execution feels like it's going to take too long, or we don't have the right capability to do that, or even the right people in place to do it. So have thought through that ahead of time, so that then it is a much simpler way to say yes when people feel like, okay, it does seem feasible. I think we have a way to get this done. And then the resource consideration. I talked a little bit about the people. Do we have the right people in place? Do we have the right team in place to go about making this happen? But also from a funding standpoint, like who's going to pay for it? Are there different ways we should consider that? Are there ways that we can phase out the idea or the execution in order to make the resources work for us in the way that they should? So this is just about kind of having thought through, if they say they think it's a good idea, how can I help get the easy yes by thinking through the execution, what the pros and cons are, and then how are we going to actually make it happen from a resource standpoint. And then this, anticipate the questions. This may seem like, duh, of course anticipate the questions, but sometimes we're so focused on the actual content and the presentation and getting that ready that we don't think about the things that might come up during the discussion. And so this is in this space of kind of, it also connects back to the kind of know your stuff, because even though you may not give every piece of information in the actual presentation, if you're prepared with potential questions that may come and are able to answer those questions, for the most part, it reinforces again that you were thorough and that you do indeed know your stuff. So think about the key questions that those stakeholders in the room, not just the decision maker, but other people who may be contributors to that or have some point of view or some perspective, what are the questions that they are going to ask or that they are likely to ask as I go through this in order to make them feel comfortable with saying yes? So thinking about those and even kind of writing down or having some bullet points. If they ask this, here's how I'm going to respond. So that you're very well prepared for that part of the discussion, which inevitably the questions will come, whether that's during the presentation or towards the end. Either way, super important to be able to make sure that you're ready for those questions when they do show up. I think of this as be also ready. So back to this blueprint. We kind of talked these three different areas of what's important in terms of crafting the message that will come that you're going to deliver, so that you can make sure that it does indeed align with what the organization is heading towards, either short term or long term, that you then can craft the appropriate story that tells and talks about a compelling way for these folks to connect with who you're trying to represent. And then how do you make sure that you've thought through all the details and the particulars that make it easy for folks to say yes? That's kind of back to the overall kind of outline of what I know what's required, and then also from my experience of things that have been really important for me as I've learned along the way in order to get that yes. Now, the last piece that I want to tell you before I open it up for some questions is that, oftentimes we don't get the yes in the moment. And that's okay. Because sometimes decisions aren't ready to be made in the moment. And sometimes you have a decision maker who is not, who does not typically make the decision on the spot. And so that's okay. We may have to deliver the message multiple times. In fact, it usually takes people on big decisions 7 times to hear the same information before it really, really sinks in and they can internalize it. And so we may have to deliver the same message multiple times, or we may have to shift the way we tell the story the second time around to reinforce the same benefits or key messages, but take a different approach as to the how in terms of how we deliver the content. So really, this is all about just understanding it, be in it for the long haul. It may not, the yes may not come on day one, but if you really know that it's the right thing to do for the business, for the organization, for the consumer, for all of the stakeholders involved, if you really believe in the data that you have and in the insight that you're bringing, if you really believe in the impact that it can have long term, then just stick with it. I have, been in working on the same part of the business now for about 7 years, and about a year and a half into this role, I had a big epiphany of an idea that I knew was the right strategy for us long term. And so I got, internal folks, my whole team rallied around this idea, and we're ready to go present it to the customer. And the customer is like nodding their head like, yeah, that makes sense. But they didn't do anything with it then. And we kept coming back with the same, changing the message a little bit, like changing the way we brought the information to life, bringing additional data. And I was getting pretty frustrated with like, why are they not just saying yes? Why are they not just moving forward with this idea? And I had to take a step back and understand that timing is everything. And so sometimes even when we have the right idea, the right benefit, it's going to have a great impact. The timing of the execution may not be right now. And that's okay. But because I knew what to do, we've continued with that message track. We've continued to reinforce the idea, strategy, and how the strategy can come to life. And eventually, the customers started speaking the strategy back to us. And I was like, oh, they get it. They get it. They just needed to hear it, and they needed to get to the right point in time where it made sense for their part and for the marketplace conditions, et cetera, to be able to execute it. So I say that to say, as much as I talked about, sense of urgency and here's what you got to do to get the yes. And if you don't get a response or don't get some action, we haven't truly done our job. It just means that they may not be ready to say yes yet. And so just keep in mind that yet piece, that it may come, but it may not come right in that same moment. Stick to it, be in it for the long haul, and you'll get the yes eventually. Before we go into Q&A, I just want to remind you of the two things. I said there were two things that I wanted you to make sure that you took away, right? The first was make it their idea. Let them have some skin in the game and some space to kind of create with you, to have some input into it so that it really feels like it's their idea as well, and they meaning that decision maker. And then the second thing is really, really leverage the art of storytelling. It is really a great way to bring insights to life, and a great way to get people to connect with, empathize, and feel like they want to move forward with your recommendation. So that's what I have for you. I'm going to go back to the blueprint slide, but we can open it up for Q&A for anything that you might want to ask about what I've shared or some of the experience that I've had in this space. And I think we're doing that through the chat feature, or if you need to come off mute and do that, we can do that as well. I am going to open up the Q&A because I think that I can see that some of the folks have sent some ahead of time. All right. Okay, so I see a question in here that is asking about, do all the recommendations apply to outside market research suppliers presenting to call it a manufacturer or who is, and would I expect that an outside supplier give a story to get me to say yes, or is their job just to supply me with the data and the insights that they've conducted for me? So I'll give a couple of thoughts here. The first is, I think this whole blueprint applies whether it's in research or any other part of business or industry. And so anytime that you want to sell someone on your idea or your recommendation, I think these points are relevant even for that. And so I would say, even if I am working in partnership with a supplier who may be helping with kind of the outside research or bringing some insight to me, even when it comes to me, I'm hoping that they are telling some story and giving some summary of what they found that helped me to even want to dig deeper into the rest of the information that they have or the data that's available. That's the way to get me to say yes to, is to get me excited about how they can bring that consumer to life and even what they provided. So I prefer then to have them to take these things and bring them to life as well, particularly in the storytelling piece. That helps me also as I work back internally. I see another question here. In parallel with the story being told, do you answer the questions you think they might have during the storytelling process, or do you let them ask the questions and guide them with your answers? This is one that I say it depends, but I think it depends on the audience. So if you know who you're talking to, some folks really have a hard time kind of waiting to get to the end before they're ready to like jump in and ask their questions. And so if you know that about them, you also want them to feel comfortable in it. And so just, you know, if it's not going to totally derail you from your presentation, then I'm okay with letting folks jump in and ask the question that really drives the engagement, even in the midst of the story. And if they're asking questions about the story, it tells me that they are engaged and paying attention and open to what the story and how the story may unfold. And so I may say, let's hold, you know, the questions about the how we execute it towards the end. But if they have questions along the way during the storytelling process, I'm totally open to having that be part of the discussion as we go through it.
So Nadja, this is Billie.
Hi, Billie.
One of the other questions that Pam asked was, do you have any tools that you use to make sure that you're using the appropriate data points while you're telling your stories?
Yeah, so I love a couple of things. If I've done some research where we've asked a lot of open ends and I've got to be able to curate all of that like text content, I love still using a Wordle or something similar that just kind of visually shows what those key points were that came out from those. So I love using that as a visual. The other thing that I like to do is then overlay like charts and graphs. So I'll use like Power BI to overlay charts and graphs with quotes or with the qualitative nature. So bringing in the quantitative and qualitative pieces together is one of the other key ways that I love kind of bringing information or data to life in that way. And then the third thing is video clips. So I'll call that tools, but bringing in video clips when we've done any kind of interviewing or where we've curated information from other available information like off of social media, et cetera. And doing that, of course, within the guidelines of privacy and what's appropriate there, but doing those as another way that I love to kind of bring that information to life.
Excellent. Pam also wanted to know, is there any metrics that you use to check yourself so that you can keep that balance between the story being simple and not overdoing it with a lot of data, but being substantive?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I try to do, especially if time allows to, is to kind of run that story by somebody else and tell it to them first. Because you usually get a good sense for whether people kind of cock their head to the side, like, what are you trying to say? Or, you know, how they respond to it. Do they get it? And then funny, sometimes I will tell kind of an abbreviated version to somebody else in my household who's not in the industry, who doesn't understand all of or use the terminology that we use or the acronyms that we use, and say, does it make sense? Is it simple enough that anyone can understand it? And then I'll bring the data in to support that I know would be required for the decision maker that I might be presenting to.
Okay. One of the other things that you talked about is we all know that research is both science and art, and the art of storytelling takes creativity. It takes a higher level of translation skills to take those insights and to make them actionable and to motivate people to act, which is what you're talking about. How do you teach younger P&G researchers the art of storytelling?
Yeah, so it's funny, about 6 months ago, I was giving a presentation with a lot of younger folks, and we were talking about this idea of storytelling. And so one of the ways that we've done that is to kind of have them bring in an idea or some insight that they have that they really are excited about sharing back with their business team, and then work through how might you tell the story around this? What information do you have? Could we kind of work on it almost case study like to help them to kind of try it out on their peers or try it out in a safe space before they have the ability to do it in front of the business. We do a similar thing with interns as well, with their mentors or their coach, so that they have a chance to kind of create it and have some help doing that for the first time, and then continue to build that skill with practice over time.
Excellent, excellent. One of the other things that you talked about was creating this sense of urgency and this idea of being provocative, which in and itself is provocative. And then you gave the example of stretching people's expectations, and you gave the example of Meet Steve, and challenging your team to walk a week in Steve's shoes. Was that one of those examples of being provocative, and can you give us others?
Yeah, the one with the low income consumer was definitely one, because we, if the brands and products that we make at P&G are tend to be the premium brand, and it is hard sometimes for people to understand that even a low income shopper is interested in and wants a quality branded product as well. And so we needed to help those leaders to understand, are they interested in and willing to buy quality products? But you need to understand the other choices that they have to make in the midst of, wanting to buy or aspiring to buy this product, but also having other responsibilities needed to take care of. And so we were considering different potential innovation plans or innovation pipelines that would, whether or not we could continue on the same path, whether or not we needed to introduce new brands or new products. And so it was a provocative thing to say, hey, all of you leaders who are nicely compensated, we want you to go live in a very different kind of environment and have your family involved in that, for 14 days. That definitely was a provocative idea, but it was intended to kind of shift the thought process and open up their minds to experience what it was like to have to make those decisions. So that's definitely one of the examples around being provocative. Another example in terms of being provocative is, we were working on a project that was a piece of innovation that we were headed down the path, like literally ready to lock on it. And the information that we had gotten from consumers was actually telling us to pause and pivot and go in a completely different direction. And so we knew that it might not be the most popular thing to come in and say, hey, instead of asking for your approval to just move forward, we actually are asking for, number one, more time. We're asking for more money to learn a little bit more, because we have an inkling and some data that would suggest that this might not be the appropriate path. And so for us to do that, we had to come in and also talk about, hey, if we do move down this path and it's not the right decision, here's the risk of what could happen. And that was one way for us to come in and be provocative about another path or to pivot, but also kind of sharing the broader context around the situation and why we were coming forward with that recommendation.
Oh, that's fascinating. One of the other things that you talked about when you introduced yourself to us, you shared your Myers-Briggs. Mm-hmm. And with that, anyone who's taken it, and I'm imagining that most of us on this call have probably taken a Myers-Briggs at some point in our professional career, it knows that it talks to us about like these different styles and how it influences our responsiveness level of openness to new ideas. And so you're applying your blueprint to a decision maker. What happens when you have a group of decision makers with multiple types of personalities and potentially even different expectations and needs? Mm-hmm. How do you approach that?
This sounds like my day job every day. There is, it can be a bit of a challenge, but I think one of the key things that is important there is understanding that even when there's a group of decision makers, there's typically one person who really is going to be the one to make the call, who really has the checkbook, who really has the accountability for what happens based off of how this decision is made. And then they're taking in the input of those other leaders and can be influenced by them as well. And so knowing, number one, that key decision maker, but also whose ear do those other key folks in the room, like who has that person's ear? Who do they truly listen to? Who do they look to when they have questions? And knowing that audience and that environment then allows you to kind of say, okay, I can't necessarily, win with all 20 people in the room, but are there 3 or 4 that are key, that if I can get my point across and get these 3 or 4 plus this decision maker, do I get the 80 for the 20? Right? Can I be choiceful about how I might approach each of those folks and make sure that there's something in this presentation that would speak to each one of them where they could connect in? Then I've probably done a good enough job of getting enough of the quorum of folks to be able to make this decision move forward.
Do you often find that you're doing a lot of that initial legwork with those influencer groups prior to getting to the point where you're actually presenting to the ultimate decision maker?
So a lot of that comes more so from making sure that we're kind of aligned within our team. And so I feel like more of that legwork is happening as a team. We're really, I think, trying to get away from so many pre-meetings before the pre-meeting to get to the meeting. And so instead, just saying, hey, how can we take all the information we already know about these leaders and about the context of the situation or the environment that we're facing and how they're thinking about this topic, to just do the pre-work in and of ourselves to make sure that we're buttoned up before we might go in front of them. And so I've taken that approach more so than trying to talk to each one of those influencers individually, because that ends up taking up a ton of time that I could probably be working on something else pretty productive.
Oh, excellent. And my last question for you, actually, this is a question for me. You also, when you introduce yourself, you have a beautiful family, and I'm assuming that you are also one of those parents who is put in a position of homeschooling. And so as I was listening to you talk about the art of persuasion and knowing your audience and putting your skin in the game, not only did I think about like, wow, how can I apply all of what you're teaching us to my professional life, but I also thought about how do I apply it to my home life as now a parent who is homeschooling and having to influence a 9-year-old. So what about what you've learned professionally are you now applying to your own life?
Yeah, I think it goes both ways, actually. There's much that I've learned professionally that I'm applying to home life, and there's much about home life that I'm applying professionally. So I would tell you that I have learned more about agility at home than I have, that I've been able to apply then in the workplace. But even for the opposite way of going the other way, one of the things, it's back to this in terms of knowing the audience, because I have kids that are at every phase of childhood. And so being able to talk to influence, to motivate them each in their individual way that they need has been really key. And so even as we've moved to having like kids home and in the house, I have actually had to shift the routine or the schedule in order to meet the needs of how do I get each of them to get what I need them to get done. So we had a schedule and everybody is on this same schedule, and about 4 days in, we're like, this is not working. And so we've shifted. I know my 5-year-old does better when she can get all of her work done before lunch, if possible, because after lunch, she's done. It's gonna be like pulling teeth, right? But my 9-year-old will come back and he needs to do things in smaller spurts. So we'll give him 20 minutes of this and then give a break, and then 20 minutes of this and give a break. And so I've learned that of how people are motivated, and also how in information, I can then craft how I deliver that message, or the timing that I deliver that message to therefore meet their needs. And I'm applying that then with my kids to make sure that they can still get everything done and that we don't have a ton of whining or moaning in the household.
Nadja, that's fascinating. Thank you so much for everything you've shared. We have about 5 minutes before our next session. What I would do is I would encourage everyone who's on the line right now to continue the conversation. By all means, if you have additional questions, put them in chat. We'll get those answered for you. Also, you can continue networking, and you can continue sharing your thoughts and ideas by going to Twitter. And what we would challenge you to do is tell us how you at your company are, and both personally, how you're selling insights internally, how you're motivating your teams, how you're telling stories. Nadja, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you. You guys have a great rest of time. I'll be around kind of joining in some other sessions as well, because I'm learning too.
We appreciate it. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.